conscious relationship. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious, as a shaman, how do you apply that consciousness into like really intimate relationship?
The conscious part of a relationship is the same as the conscious part of any other part of your life. It's about being really honest with yourself, and it's about being really honest with your partner, and that means being really transparent, which is not always easy.
It can be kind of scary, actually.
Yeah. By the way, this is my boyfriend, Jeff. So, yeah, it can be very scary at times.
At times, I personally find that I feel it would be much more difficult to do if it isn't something that I had already been doing in my own life for a long period of time. Much as Kelly has for the past few years, I've been on a journey of sorts on my own, and as a part of that, it kind of it demands a sort of rigorous honesty with myself. So I really know where I am and what I'm doing, and much like Kelly just said, it's a very conscious lifestyle choice. It really is a decision on my part, so it wasn't too difficult to incorporate that into the relationship for me. And because of that, it wasn't as intimidating, since it was something I had been doing already. It made the transition much, much easier. But in my experience, she's right. It's just doing the same thing with the relationship that I had started to do anyway.
Yeah. But
it's a little bit different application, but...
Yeah. It's a little more complicated because, you know, when you're doing it with yourself, if you're not ready to deal with an issue, you just don't deal with it, right?
That's true.
When you're dealing with a partner, sometimes they're going to whack you in the face with something that you're not prepared to deal with. And they're dealing with it, which means you have to deal with it. And so, you know, you have to be prepared. If you're going to be in a fully transparent relationship, you have to be prepared to hear things that aren't easy to hear or that might hurt. And you have to give your partner permission to say those things, because if you don't, then they stop relating. And when they stop relating, they're out of relationship and the relationship is doomed, right? And so the one underlying agreement that Jeff and I have is everything is negotiable. Absolutely everything in our relationship is negotiable at all times. Now, we do have some agreements around that, being that, you know, if something were to change, sometimes it's going to require some getting used to before it changes. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I got to wrap my brain around a new way of being in this relationship. And so you're going to have to give me a little time to do that. Okay. But, you know, there's the understanding is that there's nothing that's off limits. There's nothing that can't be discussed. And everything is negotiable. And that way, neither one of us has to keep anything to ourselves or wish that things were different and not be able to talk about it, or risk that everything's going to blow up if I talk about it or whatever, right?
Can you give an example, something that's negotiable that surprised you that you have to negotiate?
Have we hit anything super negotiable? Have we hit anything like that yet?
Nothing earth-shattering that I can remember. I know there have been a couple of things, but they're not jumping to mind.
Well, we did have the discussion about children. That was a big one.
That was what, week 3?
Yeah, we kind of went on the accelerated program. Jeff and I covered all of the things that most couples talk about before they get married within our first 6 weeks of relationship. So, yeah. But we did talk about children, and I'm really clear that I don't want kids. And he's like, well, I might want kids. And I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, let's talk about it. You know, he's pretty young still, and there's going to be a limited time frame to me being able to have kids because I'm 14 years older than him. And I said, you know, are you attached to it being your own kid? And he's like, well, no. And so, you know, we had this conversation about, you know, maybe as I get older, you know, when I'm 10 years down the road, when he'll just be in his early 40s, I'm like, maybe we look at adopting an older child, because for me, it's like, I do not want to be pregnant. I don't want to have a baby that's got diapers and all that stuff to deal with. But I quite enjoy children once they hit the age of 3 or 4. Okay? I have no use for them before that. It's true, it's honest, it is, right? And so, we talked about it, and we're like, well, I may be willing to consider that in the future. It's not something that I'm like, no children ever. I know that it's a massive sacrifice, and it's one I'm not willing to make right now. But perhaps in the future I could be persuaded, or, we could work it out in such a way that we could provide a home to a child that needs it, an older child that's having a harder time getting adopted or whatever, But it's a conversation that we had very early on in our relationship. Very early. You want to talk about a hard conversation to have. He wasn't wrong. I think it was week 2 or 3 of our relationship.
Something like it, yeah.
Yeah. So, it was one of those conversations. Because he has a tendency to date older women, and, one of them looked at him and said, never. No children ever. So
it was an
it's a big deal for him.
It was an internal dialogue that I had to have in the past already. So, and the idea of there are all sorts of different options around it, and biology is a factor, and especially when you're talking about somebody who's a little bit older than me.
That's very politically well done.
Thank you. But looking at reality, there is a definite time window, and one of my kind of battle cries for a long time has been, I can hardly take care of myself, let alone another human being. So I'm not entirely sure that I'm ready for it now, but part of the dialogue I had it with myself is maybe it's something that can be looked at down the road. So I had already approached the subject with the idea of, I don't know that I want to have a kid in the next 9 months, but I might in the next 9 years. I don't know. I can't say that one definitively. And because of that, I find it very difficult to make any type of a decision surrounding that right now. So it kind of has to be negotiable as we go forward, just inherently by the nature of it. We need to be able to have that open conversation.
So it sounds like in the process of negotiating, you were put to confront your own set beliefs. Yeah. So in this process of helping each other to review the set beliefs, you have to help each other to challenge it, and be honest.
Yeah.
And
that is one of the things that we do for each other. Sometimes he'll say something to me, I'm like, is that really what you want? Or is that just what you think I want you to say? And...
Yeah.
Guilty. Done that before.
And, that's one of the things that I do for him in that instance, is to say that. Now, I used to do that a lot, and so, he doesn't do that as much for me, but he does a lot of other things for me,
So that's my question, right? To what extent should you be honest? To the extent that you have to consider whether this come out as hurting or not, right? There's different ways of putting things, and there's different. How do you define honesty in this case?
I really like the question, and for me, it's kind of. I had mentioned before. There's one of the things that I've been doing for a number of years already is kind of being honest with myself. So what I personally try very hard not to do is to let whatever knee-jerk reaction it is that's going on in my head come out in a painful way. I try not to let my feelings rule completely. And a lot of that is something that I've done internally, as far as if I'm mad at someone, or let's say there's a situation that could potentially happen that might have an outcome that would scare me, that I wouldn't like. Instead of letting my reaction to that potential, or my reaction to that anger, come out inappropriately, what I've already done is kind of taken a process to look at what is the reality behind it. What is it that I'm really upset about? Is there something I can do about it? Is that really me, or is that somebody else's stuff? What is it that I'm really afraid of? Is it as bad as I think it's going to be? Is it just looking at it objectively? So when I think of being honest with Kelly, it's not so much in the sense of every single little thing that goes on in my head I will tell her. It's when I'm being honest with myself and I know that when I've already had that internal process and I've already gotten down to this is what's really going on and this is the truth behind it, sharing that with her, because then it's not going to come out in a painful way, it's coming out in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Because I've already gotten to the constructive part to myself. Her reaction might be something else completely. It might be something that triggers something for Kelly that I'm not aware of in her past that she interprets as painful. But that's not my intent, and that's where the two of us kind of come together, and we both realize on some level that we're working for the betterment of each other.
Yeah.
And since she knows that's where I'm approaching it from, even if she interprets it in a place that's painful for her, she's also working from a place of, okay, well, if that's painful to me, why is it painful? What's the truth behind it? And then let's have a dialogue about that. Let's talk about that. Because it's a process that we're both somewhat familiar with.
Yeah. So, the short answer is you do your own internal processing before you bring it to your partner. You look at what pieces are yours. You take it apart and you say, okay, you got to get out of victim and blame and all that other happy hoo-ha, right? You have to look at your partner and say, this person loves me, they're not trying to hurt me, they are not the enemy. And you have to go through that process first. And then once you can get down to the place where you're like, okay, this is what's going on for me, then you can share that. And I find that it's really helpful to be able to share why it's triggering you or what's going on for you. So can I share the story about the wedding and the stuff from that?
As anonymously as possible, yes.
Yes, okay. So Jeff had someone that he had been really interested in before we met. And he was, there was a lot of attachment for him to that potential relationship that didn't really go anywhere. And, it was months between that and when we got together. And so we happened to run into this person at an event recently, and all of those feelings came up for him again. And he had to process that. And, as a partner, to see your partner still so heavily entrenched with someone else can be rather threatening. Even if that relationship didn't go anywhere, it doesn't matter. Suddenly you're not the most special person in the world, right? And, we did a lot of processing around that. And he shared some stuff with me that was true for him. That typically, and in fact, he had a conversation with a friend of his and, was talking about our conversation that he had shared with me. And his friend said, you didn't tell Kelly that, did you? And he was like, well, yeah, I did. He's like, oh my God, you never say that to a woman. It was like, oh, because, it was something like, that without sharing that, I'm trying not to share specifics. But,
well, the interesting thing about it is that one of the things I've taken to saying about our relationship to other people is that it's the kind of thing, if I weren't present for every single moment of it, I would think I am completely insane. And what I really mean by that is some of the things surrounding this processing that we did that we had talked about can be things that would destroy almost any relationship that either I have had or that other people who I've talked to about it have had, or she's had.
Relationships I've had in the past.
Very, very incendiary topics. And
big time.
I couldn't tell you why. Because frankly, I don't know. I am just absolutely certain that for some reason we have an ability to talk about absolutely anything. and coming out of saying okay on the other side.
Yeah. Not just okay, better.
Which is true.
On the other side, every time.
But most of the time, the processing is something I would have done anyway. Most of the time it would have been either with one of my friends or in cooperation with myself internally, and just not have that dialogue with Kelly, because most of the time it's just not appropriate to burden her with something that she doesn't need to be. She doesn't need to be a party to that information. If I'm processing with someone else, the outcome is going to be the same. But for some reason, I just know that it's perfectly fine with her, and I don't know why, but it seems to be unique to us.
So I can give an example from much earlier in our relationship. There was a comment that Jeff made to me at one point. He said, "I'm afraid I'm not attracted enough to you." And for any woman, that's like, what? And, especially a woman of size, we've got all these stories, right? And so it would be very easy to go into the story. And I just laughed because I was like, oh, honey, every time I touch you, you get hard. There's no way you're not attracted to me. It's like you've got a perpetual hard-on for me. Your body does not lie. And so what is actually the issue here, right? Because it's not... And that's what it turned out to be. It wasn't about him being attracted to me. It turned out to be a story about how he perceived other people would think of him dating me. And that was his issue. And, and that was because I was heavy, right? And it wasn't that he didn't find heavy attractive, because he clearly did, clearly does, still does. It was because he was concerned about how it would impact how other people saw him. And I said, well, I got to tell you, I could lose weight until the cows come home, and this isn't going to solve this problem. Because I'm still 14 years older than you, and at some point I'm going to be old and wrinkly, and you're still going to have this issue. So this is your problem, not mine, to deal with, and I suggest you go figure it out. Okay? So and I'm here to support you in it. I'm happy to help you with that. But it's not my problem. And I didn't own it in any way, ever. It was just like, oh, okay, I see the truth in that. I see the cultural truth in that. I see the issue for you. I have compassion for it, and it has nothing to do with me. Right?
Which is absolutely right.
Yeah. And he did, obviously, because he's still here.
Well, this is really powerful. So it takes a lot of expectation of each other's strengths in order to...
Yeah, you have to trust the other person to do their work, and you have to trust them to be a competent individual, and you have to trust them to be able to do their own process and to hold their own space. For him to say that to me, I mean, that was a big deal. That's a big thing to say to somebody you're dating. And how do you say that? That's one of those things that you never say that to a woman, right? And I believe that you got that same reaction.
I did.
From your friend. You're like, you didn't say that to her, did you? And I was like, yeah, I did. And I was so grateful that he did. He says really hard things to me sometimes. And I'm so grateful that he does, because I know what's going on. And I'm not left in the dark wondering why he's pulled away and feeling like, oh my God, what's happening?
What's the next shoe that's going to drop?
Right, exactly. I'd much rather have him say, this is what's going on for me, and I'm, and for me to sit with it. And this last event, this last piece where he was processing about this woman, I asked him some really hard questions. One of which was, if she turned around tomorrow and said, I will be everything you've ever wanted me to be, and I want you, would you go with her, or would you stay with me? That's a hard question to ask. It's a really hard question to ask. But it was a question that needed to be looked at.
Because ultimately that was the issue.
Because that was ultimately the thing. What do you want to be? And if you don't ask the question, you can't get clarity.
But some women throw out questions like this. They actually force the man to give the answer they expect. It's like But
you can ask him. Did you
yeah.
feel like I was forcing you to give an answer that I wanted?
No, and I didn't feel that way, and I think it's one of the things that I keep thinking back to the reason. One of the things that we've both said in the past is 6 months, anywhere from 6 months to a year before we met, we would not have been prepared to be in this relationship, because it has required a type of honesty and a type of
transparency
that I just wouldn't have been capable of, which is really saying something. And so for her to ask me that question, and as long as we've been in a relationship for, I already knew where she was coming from with it. She wasn't coming from the judgmental place of her or me. She was coming from,
what do you really want?
This is the core issue that we're dealing with right now. This is what this is going to keep coming up until you answer this question for yourself. So, answer the question for yourself. And she wasn't trying to be harmful. She wasn't trying to be manipulative. She was just asking the question to help me get where I needed to go.
And I want to be really honest. If he had said, I want to be with her, then we would have had a serious conversation about whether or not we should continue. Because, you know, if that's how attached he was to her, then he needed to go figure that out.
Because it's going to be there in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it would always be there. And so, you know, and if that were the case, then, you know, we would have had a conversation. And, you know, and this goes back to the negotiable thing, right? So how do you negotiate that? Do you break up? Do you say, okay, well, why don't you go pursue her and see how that goes? And, you know, we'll continue seeing each other, and you know, if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out, and you've put that to bed. And if it does work out and you decide that you want to be with her and me, then we can talk about that. If you decide that you want to just be with her, then we'll be done. You know, if you're holding a space where you really want the other person to be happy, you have to be willing to explore everything that it takes for the other person to be happy. And you have to balance that with whether or not you're going to be happy in that scenario. So, you know, whether or not I could have been in a relationship that was that way,
we didn't have to find out.
We didn't have to find out. For me, I have to really like the other person. I have been in a triad relationship before, and I really liked the other person, and it worked great. This particular person I didn't care for as much, so I don't know that it would have worked out as well. But you know, it's something that we would have had to talk about and negotiate and look at and whatever, and we didn't have to.
You mentioned this word care for, you care about that person that much, then there's a sense of you have to balance not making it personal, as versus I care so much about you, like you expect the other person cares as much, and then you have to balance it with, you know, not taking it personal and talk about honestly.
I find that the place where most people break down, and where I've broken down in the past, is in the sacrifice category. We perceive that we have to sacrifice in order to make the other person happy. And so what we do is we put their happiness above our own. And that's not the goal. The goal is to make both people happy. Right? And, you know, a lot of times what happens is that in relationships, people will say, you know, it is your job to make me happy and my job to make you happy. And that is also wrong. It is my job to make me happy and then to express my love for my partner. That is my job. If I can contribute to his happiness, great. But I cannot make anyone else happy. Happiness is a choice. I can't make that choice for you. You have to make that choice for yourself. So either you're going to choose to be happy or not. Now, I can amplify that for you. I can help to increase that happiness, but you're going to choose whether or not you're happy. And so the only person I can truly make happy is me. And so I have to be responsible for that first and foremost, because if I'm not happy, the relationship's going to die. Right? And so we always look at it backwards. We're like, oh, I have to make the other person happy. But then you get resentful and you start keeping score, and then shit falls to hell. You know, it all goes to hell in a handbasket. It just does.
So where in this process does love fit in? If you leave the other person to figure out to get happy on himself.
Well, no. That's not what I said. What I said was happiness is a choice. If he chooses not to be happy, there's not a thing in the world I can do about that. Okay? That's just true. If he decides he wants to be unhappy, I can't fix that. I can stand on my head and twist myself into a pretzel, and I can't fix that. I learned that in my first marriage. I really did. Yeah. That
doesn't mean that you aren't willing to help whenever necessary.
Right.
You don't. Still making yourself available, but also detaching from, I can't force it on you.
Right.
I'll offer help. I'll be of assistance, but I can't make you do something.
Right. I can offer. I can extend an invitation. Hi, honey. What do you need to be happy? Can I help you with that? Okay. But if he's like, no, I'm still attached to being unhappy, it's like, okay, well, you have fun with that. You let me know when you're done.
Pretty much.
You know, and that's all I can do, because you know, if he's happy being unhappy, then you know, why should I damage his bliss?
Let me elaborate on the topic of love.
Yes.
In the process, where do you see love fits in?
Everywhere.
In the soul, in the process that we already covered.
Everywhere. So you know, the thing, we were talking about processing, right? And we were talking about really getting down to what it is that you need, right? And we talked about that, you know, with the woman that he was attached to and so on. And we went through a process, and we were processing a lot of his stuff. And it triggered some of my stuff, you know, because my core story for many, many years was that I'm not important, and I'm not welcome, and I'm not wanted. And you want it, and not good enough, right? And you talk about hitting the not good enough, not important button. You know, have your partner be really attached to somebody else, and it's going to hit that button. Thank you. Ow! 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 Yeah. And so thank God I'd done a lot of work on that button. So it doesn't hit me nearly the way it used to. But it's still, you know, there's twinges there, right? And so at some point, he poked it. And I really had to sit with it. I was like, okay, I know this is the button, because I've been doing work with it for a long time. But what do I need in this moment? What is it that I'm really feeling right now? And how can I help him make me feel better? Right? You know, how can I make myself feel better? Right? And ultimately it's my job to make myself feel better. But what I realized was that I wasn't feeling special anymore. And that I really wanted to feel special to him. Okay? Now, I felt special unto myself. I still felt like I was a good person, and that I was pretty and sexy and all these other things, right? I still had all of that, but I needed to feel special to him. And so I needed his help, right? Because it was about our relationship that was the challenge for me. It wasn't about my internal sense of self that was challenged. And so I came to him and I was like, could you please tell me how I am special to you? I am not feeling, as a result of our conversations, I'm really not feeling special. And I need to feel special again. So can you tell me how I am special to you? And it's the best question I've ever asked. Because, you know, I mean, that could have been a very different conversation, right? Because I could have come and gone, you know, you just don't care about me, and you know, which I've done before. Which is why I say I couldn't have done this in previous relationships. You know, you suck, and I've done all this for you, and you don't love me enough, right? Which is really where a lot of us go, where I've gone in the past. But, you know, when I got down to it, I was like, I need to feel special. And he looked at me and he said, And he just stopped for a minute. Do you remember what you said?
I couldn't.
I can tell you what you said, but
I can't remember the exact words. I know I could come up with a facsimile of it. I don't remember exactly what it was.
You know, what he did was he checked in, and he's like, you know, I'm trying to put into words the feeling that I have. And, you know, he said, every day when I leave for work, I don't want to leave you. And when I'm at work, I'm always thinking about you. I can't wait to get home. He said, I'm perpetually hard for you. And it's not because I'm perpetually hard, it's because I find you attractive. Which is, you know, going back to a previous conversation. And he said that I was the most sexually empowered woman that he knew.
That was part of it. It was present and awake while also being sexually empowered woman. It wasn't just one. It was in the context of.
Yeah, he said I was also one of the most spiritually evolved people he'd ever met.
That's the word. Spiritually evolved and sexually awake, and.
Yeah. In short, he gave me a long list of things that he adored about me, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm all better now. Thanks. I was like, whoa, you know, he made the first two comments about wanting to come home to me and not wanting to leave me, and I was good at that point, and he kept going, and I was like, you had me at hello. You know, I was good after the first two comments, but I'm not going to shut you up because every comment you make makes me feel even better. So, you know, there was just that place, you know, and so I wasn't asking him to fix something that I didn't feel good about inside of me. I was asking him to help me feel connected in our relationship again. And that's the difference. You know, that's the difference, because you can't expect your partner to fix you. They can hold space for you. And that he's beautiful at that. Oh my God, he's so good at that. He's so good at holding space for me. You know, when we're talking about getting married, and we have been talking about getting married, the universe has been whacking us over the head with getting married almost since the day we met. And the thought of getting married again. Now, I was married for 7 years, and I've been divorced for 16. So that it's been a very long time since I've considered getting married. And it brought up a lot of stuff for me from my marriage that I had not processed, that I didn't realize I hadn't processed. And he was beautiful at just holding space for that and going, oh, okay, I see that this is what's going on for you. How does that feel for you? And, you know, what do you think about that? And, you know, you're really holding on to some resentments there, and, you know, maybe that's not your best option. You know, do you really need to resent this, you know, 20 years later? It's like, maybe not, you know. But I was righteously angry about it at the time, and I was really attached to it, and it just never occurred to me to look at it again, you know. You had something to say?
Well, I was going to say that one, when it was interesting, and I know I've done it in the past, and you've done it since as well. Kind of the key to that one for me was, and I don't know that I had this, I had these words in my head at the time, but I just kind of knew. It wasn't about me at all. Whatever the final result of all of that discussion and all of that processing might have been, it's probably had an impact on me since, but none of it was about me. None of it had anything to do with me whatsoever. So I was really able to just kind of detach, be somewhat sympathetic without being really attached to whatever it is that she's going through, and let her sit and go through what she needed to go through so she could come to the conclusion that she needed to get to, so that she could be
present and available
where she needed to go. Yeah. And I didn't have to be, but I need you to come to this conclusion because this is what I want. I didn't need that.
Yeah.
Because it really wasn't about me at all.
Yeah. There's one other thing that I want to get in so that we don't forget, because it's really important in our relationship. Both of us are really good at saying I'm sorry. And we do it all the time, and we mean it every time. Because, I mean, I'm sorry doesn't work.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just this morning.
Well, you did it this morning just now. Just before we started this, actually, it was absolutely beautiful. But one of the things that I've said a number of times and really do mean is that I will use the words "I'm sorry." Normally it's in the context of "I'm sorry, I will try not to do it again," and trying to mention some sort of a corrective action that I can take or some way that I can make whatever behavior it was better. But because of that, I am not going to say I'm sorry unless it is true. Unless I really do mean it, I'm not even going to bother saying it, because then it just comes right down to me lying to your face.
Right.
If I'm not willing to do anything about the fact that I left the TV on at 2 o'clock in the morning and you woke up, oh, I'm sorry, just shut you up and make you be quiet, there's no point in that, other than right now you being quiet. But if I'm legitimately sorry that you had to get up and turn the TV off, well, there's an apology for you, and also something that'll let you know I'm going to try not to do it again. So we do say it a lot, but
it's always meant. It's always sincere.
And it has to be, and we know that, and that it's part of the reason why it really works. It is the reason why it really works.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the fact that you were coming over today to do this interview, and that you usually give me a topic, and last night at like 9 o'clock, you hadn't sent me a topic yet, and so I thought, well, Jeff's got the day off, why don't we talk about this? And the more I thought about it, the more excited I got about it, and then you sent me a topic, and I was like, yeah, I do want to talk about that, but I really want to talk about this. And so in my head, I had already decided that, assuming that you were willing to go along with it, that this is what we were doing.
And what she had said, what she had said last night was, tomorrow she's going to come over, and if she doesn't have something to talk about, I'm going to give this as an option. And if she wants to, would you be willing to come and sit in with us?
Right. So
then I said, well, do I have to prepare anything? Would it be more of a conversation than an interview? What is it that we're dealing with? Because I don't, it was last night. I don't really have time to prepare very much.
And I said, no, it's just a conversation.
Whereas by the time this morning rolls around, she had thought,
in my head, we were already doing this. And so when you showed up, he let you in, and then he left, and he went into the bedroom. And I'm sitting here waiting and waiting and waiting for him to come back, and I'm going, where the hell are you? And I came out of the room, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? You're laying in bed. Why are you not in the room? We're waiting on you. And he's like, you told me that if you needed me, you were going to come and get me. And I was like, well, we're doing this. And he's like, okay. And, by the time he got out to the hallway, I went, you're right. That's exactly what I told you. I changed it in my head. I didn't tell you. That's entirely my fault. I am so sorry. And he said, thank you for the apology. And that was just as we walked in the door here, Because, nobody's perfect. In my head, everything had changed, and he hadn't read my mind. And damn it, I was pissed. And then I was like, wait a minute, that's unreasonable, and that happens. We have this conversation a lot too, because I girl speak to him sometimes. I throw a thing into the room that needs to get done, and he goes, yeah, okay. And he doesn't realize that what I've done is made a request, because I haven't actually made a request. I've spoken girl speak. I said, oh, we need to do this.
Which to some of us guys can kind of sound kind of like the teacher in Charlie Brown.
Yeah, so I've had days where I've said the same thing 3 times in the course of 4 hours. And he's just gone, each time, and not registered it as a request because I never actually stated it as one. And so, I got frustrated that he didn't pick up on it, and he's confused. And I'm like, okay, I have to own that. If I go back and think about what I said, I did not actually state a request. and I spoke girl speak to a guy, and I got what I got, and I had to own that, So it goes in both directions. So it's one of those things that you really, and this is where the love comes in. It's like, okay, I know he's not trying to piss me off. Just like when I was irritated with him this morning, he didn't snap back at me. He just went, I'm confused. Didn't you say this?
Because it was so out of left field. It was just, where is this coming from? Why are you mad? What?
Why are we having this conversation? I'm lost. And he didn't get defensive. He just went, I'm checking in on what you said. And I'm like, and I was still irritated, and he, to his credit, took a breath and let me register what he had said. And I went, oh, yeah, my bad, sorry. Because he knew that, I'm not attached to being angry at him. I don't like to be angry. I don't want to be angry at him.
Yes.
And he knows that I love him and that I want him to be happy. And so if I'm being bitchy, he knows it's either hormonal or I've got a problem, or there's something else going on. At which point, he knows he'll get an apology from me in short order. I'm usually pretty good about it, within an hour, without prompting often, usually. I'll come back and be like, I'm being really bitchy today. I don't know what my problem is. I don't know if I'm PMSing or I'm going to go sit by myself until I can be civil. Can I, and I'm really sorry because I realize I'm taking it out on you and it's not your fault and I'm so sorry. And, and that'll be a conversation we have without him ever having to prompt me in a lot of instances. Because, it's not like I'm perfect. I'm not. I screw shit up all the time. I just fix it as fast as I can. And that's where the love comes in. We're asking where the love comes in. It's wanting to make sure that it's making the harmony of the relationship a priority.
This is good. So in this example, you talk about love from you, like taking responsibilities. Do you expect as a relationship goes in 10 years down the road and he can read your mind and without you having to apologize, he will point that out and give you the comfort. And, by you just doing the girls' talk, he will be able to take the responsibility. Do you think that's an evolution of love?
I would like to think that he will learn to speak girl speak, and I have absolutely no attachment to that. We learn each other better with every passing day. And it is never going to be his responsibility to read my mind. Ever. Okay? He does read my mind sometimes. And I appreciate it, but I don't expect it, and I never will. Okay? Because it's my job to speak and hold my own mind. And it's my job to speak and hold my own boundaries. And it's my job to speak and hold my own needs. And that will never change. Even if he does read my mind and know all of those things and do all of those things, it will never be something I expect. This is one of the conversations that he and I have on a regular basis, is that he constantly impresses me. I'm constantly blown away by his consciousness, by his awareness, by his ability to hold space, by his ability to be present. Not to say that there aren't things about him that don't drive me crazy, like everybody has about everybody, but the things that are important blow my mind on a regular basis. It just does. And for me, if you had known me for the last 20, 30 years of my life, every man I've dated has in some way been insufficient. Has in some way had something that I looked at and went, yeah, I got some concerns about that. There's something that on a fundamental level was a problem. And I kept looking at myself and saying, well, you find fault with everyone. Because it can't just be that everybody's screwed up. You just find fault with everybody. And I think that that wasn't true. I think that I didn't look for people who had I didn't realize what my core values were. And so I was looking for people who were providing me with the things that I looked for, but they were not the things that I valued. And, you know, with Jeff, the things that I value are all there. And so, you know, the other things that may not be a match in some cases, so what? Not a big deal, you know. I'm not going to Jerry Seinfeld my life. You know? Oh, you know, this person does this. You know, she's a big talker, or you know, whatever, right? That's the stuff that just doesn't matter. You know, fine, you compensate. But the important stuff is there. And it took me a long time to realize that the important stuff for me is the spiritual connection. It's that presence piece. It's the romance. It's the reverence for one another. It's the transparency, right? And, you know, I mean, he can't leave the house or come home without us having a 1.5-minute, 2-minute long kiss. Because that's just how we do it. That's how we roll. It's like, oh, you're here. Let me revel in you for a minute. You know? Let me be really, really happy to see you. Right?
I love that part of this.
Yeah. It's so funny too, because, you know, we talk about how intense these conversations have been, and how, you know, they can trigger stuff, bring stuff up, and yet the two of us, you know, I don't want to be really clear, we're both really intense people. we revel in the intensity of life, and that's just who we are as people. And, you know, we've gone through a lot of really intense stuff together. And yet, because we're so comfortable with being who we are and with being in those places, we look at each other. Now, you know, if you saw us process all this stuff, you would not think that what I was about to say is true. But we look at each other and go, wow, you know, it's so amazing that we have such deep conversations, and it feels so easy. Because it does. It feels so easy. It's one of the conversations that we have on a regular basis is, you know, this is we do a lot of processing, but it doesn't feel hard. You know, I've done processing with people where it felt like slogging through the mud and the muck, and you're just like, oh, God. But it's not that way with us. You know? Do you have anything to say?
I think a lot of that goes to how I know you've done a lot of processing with other people. I've done a fair amount with other people myself, not professionally, but through different avenues. And when I was analyzing myself a lot, a number of years ago, really for the first time, it took a long time. It was really difficult, and some people might say painful, but it was a lot more difficult. There was a lot more attachment to it. And, you know, like you were just saying that it's something that you do when you work with people, that it's you know, you're delving into the deepest parts of them. And I think that's true. I know it was true for me when I started delving deeply into myself. I'm sure it was true for you when you started. And in my personal opinion, that way for anybody. The first time you really start looking at what's going on, it can be really difficult. It can be painful. It can be, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't want to look at, but I did because it had to happen. And I think part of the reason that we do that so well together is because we've processed on our own enough, and we've processed with other people who are new to it enough to know that first off, we have an idea of how to do it, of the mechanics of how it works in general. We have an understanding that it can be very difficult because we've faced those difficulties before, but because we also both have some experience with it, we have an idea of what the benefit is on the other side. And while it might be uncomfortable for 4 or 5, 20 minutes, it always winds up being something that's going to bring us closer together. And we just both know that. We don't even really have to talk about it. We just know it. And I think that's a large part of the reason why this works, because we've both been doing it for a significant period of time anyway. So it just feels natural to be doing it together.
And there's trust. I think that's another big piece, is that, I trust you to process your own stuff, and you trust me to process mine. And we trust each other to speak the truth. Because if you're speaking half-truths or, hedging your bets or whatever, you're never going to get to what's real.
I mean, you are lucky to have a partner like you do to work on this together. But for a person who has decided to apply this conscious life to their intimate relationship, well, you don't know what the other partner is like. What advice would you give?
That's the same advice.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to hold your own space. You have to be responsible for your own happiness. You have to approach the other person as though they're not the enemy, and as with the understanding that their intention is to love you and to make you happy. Even if what they're doing isn't making you happy, they're hoping to make you happy. They're just doing it in a way that isn't working for you. You have to be responsible for your own triggers. And sometimes they're not responsible for theirs, and sometimes they're not going to be able to hold that space with you. That is its own growth ground. I've been in a lot of relationships over the years, and some of them, the other person grew me because the way that they engaged with me allowed me to behave differently. And that allowed me to start making some changes. I'm thinking of one partner I had who got that when I was angry, what I was really is hurt. And so when I was angry, he would come and give me a hug and tell me he loved me and say, that I was cared for. And that allowed me to release the anger and to really get down to what was really going on for me. And I learned over the years of being with him that, this is how I can do this for myself, right? And so then in my next relationship, I didn't need that, right? I could do that for myself. Not to say that it's not a good thing. I mean, it would be lovely to have, but these days I don't really need it, because I really do it for myself. So, every relationship has its own growth potential, and the encouragement is to treat it as your own personal workshop rather than the challenge that happens when one partner is working on this stuff and the other one isn't, is that the partner who's working on it eventually starts looking at the other partner and finding them deficient in some way. and they're like, you're not keeping up with this, and you're not doing that, and da-da-da-da-da. And the other partner never agreed to that. Okay? They never bought into this. And you are setting expectations that they did not agree to. And that's not fair. So, you have to decide for yourself when you walk on this path. And you need to be really clear. If you step onto this path and you start walking it really firmly, there is the potential for you to outgrow your partner. That is always an option. And there is also the potential for you to learn how to hold the space for yourself that doesn't require your partner to walk it with you. And so, there is a place where you can say, this is what this person brings to me. I loved them enough to make a partnership with them at the time. Is this still working for me? Can I still accept this from this person? And not hold the expectation that they be somebody they're not. Right? Because if you're going to expect them to be somebody they're not, then you might as well just give it up. Because you're not relating to them, you're relating to a fantasy you have. So, that's the question. Is what you're getting still sufficient for you? And can you hold the vision of them being who they are, not of who you wish they were?
So at what point is this seeker of a conscious life decide he or she has outgrown their partner and then it's right for them to leave?
Well, for everybody that path is a different path. You have something to want to know?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, there's no set rule about when it's time to leave. Okay? But what I would say is this, is that if you are unhappy more than you are happy, it is probably time to go.
But then it comes back to the happiness, right? Now you are depending your happiness on who the partner is.
No. And again, I'm going to bring it back to the conversation we had about feeling special, right? There is your personal happiness, which is about you knowing what is right for you, right? And then there is the harmony of the relationship, okay? And so the harmony of the relationship is the happiness that I'm talking about. If there is disharmony more often than there is harmony in the relationship, and that has not changed in 6 months to a year, despite efforts to change it, then that may be a time to take a look at it, okay? But only after you've looked at your own stuff, okay? Because everybody's always looking outside of themselves going, oh, well, you're doing this and you're doing that and it's making me unhappy, blah, 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 blah. Inside first. Inside first. You got to process all your own crap before you can even begin to look at the relationship. So, that's the first thing. So when I say 6 months to a year of changing, working to change it, that's after you've dealt with your own stuff. Okay? If you've dealt with your own stuff and you've come to peace with your own pieces of it, and you've said, okay, this is my piece of it, and you've worked it, and you've worked it, and you've worked it, and you still are not finding any harmony, then, that may be a time. But again, it's different for every person. What I would say is this: I will give you bad reasons to stay. How about that? Okay? Bad reasons to stay are, I made the commitment. That's a bad reason. Okay? Because the person you were when you made the commitment is not the person you are now. And commitments were made and you kept the commitment for so long as you could. It's a bad reason to stay. Okay? It's just an excuse to not make a change. That's what that is. If I don't quit, I can never fail. That's a bad reason to stay. Okay? Because that's just, in accounting practices, that would be throwing good money after sunk cost. You've already sunk a certain amount of energy into it. Just because you put this much money into it doesn't mean you should put more money into it, even if it's a bad, if it's a bad investment, right? It's, just because you put a lot of money into it doesn't make it a good investment, right? So that's the same concept on a relationship level. Another good reason not to stay is I don't want to make my mother or father right, because they said it was doomed, right? It's like, I don't want to make them right. That's a bad reason to stay. Can you tell I'm telling you some things from my personal experience? Yeah. 6.5 years in a relationship that I didn't want to be in because I didn't want to make my father right. And if I can't quit, and if I don't quit, I can never fail. That was another one for me. I made the commitment. That was another one. All bad reasons to stay. Yeah, all really bad reasons to stay. When you look at the option of staying or going, and you look at both of you objectively, and you say, both of us individually would be more happy if we were not together, that's the time to leave.
So to sum it up, what advice can you offer for a person who's looking for a mate, looking for a partner?
You will find them in the most unexpected places.
Saying nothing.
I think what I would say is become the perfect mate, and the other person will find you. Everybody focuses on finding the perfect person, and they rarely consider the question of, would that person want me? Am I the person that person would want? They often have this big view of this person that they're like, oh, they would be this and they would be that, and da-da-da-da. And if you think about that person, are you the person they'd want? In many instances, the answer to that is no. In which case you're setting yourself up for failure, right? So,
I've heard that called the law of attraction.
Yeah. So, and isn't that what you wanted to talk about today? We'll talk about that next time, but yeah, we're talking about it now. So there's a place where we go looking for someone to fill the empty spot inside of us. And it's a really bad idea. Because
there are things in my life that you can't do for me, that nobody else can do for me. I can only come to terms and come to peace with them on my own.
And so, if you ask me to fill that gap,
it's an unreasonable expectation.
It is. It's an unreasonable expectation. So, it's fill your own emptiness. When you fill your own emptiness, then you come to the other person as a whole person. And
when two whole people meet,
then that's when intimacy can happen.